Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we begin a slow and solemn descent into a world half forgotten by time. A world of discipline and decay, of stone and silence, of restless winds whispering over the northern reaches of the Roman Empire. In this 2-hour historical immersion, we drift into the life of a nameless Roman soldier stationed at Hadrian's Wall Britannia's final frontier. As always, we will walk through history gently and thoroughly. So settle in, breathe slowly, and prepare for the bleak hum of existence on the edge of civilization. You awaken before first light, not because a bell has rung or an officer has barked an order, but because your body has simply stopped pretending it can rest. The stone floor beneath the straw-stuffed mattress has pressed against your spine all night like a silent accusation. You are not in Rome. You are not even in Gaul. You are in Britannia, far from home, far from warmth, far from the scent of olives and sun-baked roads. Outside your barracks, there is only the wall, the wind, and the wet smell of rot that creeps into everything. The air, even indoors, feels like it has weight. It presses against your ribs, your temples, your fingertips. It is cold in a way that cannot be measured with numbers. It is the kind of cold that becomes part of your identity. The wall is close, always close. You sleep beside it, you eat beside it, you urinate with your back turned to it. You are the wall. At least, that's what they tell you. The empire sends its legions to build things that last: amphitheaters, aqueducts, laws. But here, in the far north of Britannia, what they build is permanence in the form of quiet suffering. Hadrian's Wall is less a structure and more a philosophy. It says, you do not belong beyond this line, but it also whispers to the men stationed upon it, and neither do you truly belong behind it. You are suspended, forgotten by the cities to the south, and never welcome in the wilds to the north. You are nowhere. Morning comes as a dim gray shift in the sky. There is no sun, not in the way you remembered from the south. Here, the light simply changes from black to ash. You rise slowly, bones creaking like old hinges, and join the others who are already donning their armor in near silence. No one speaks much in the mornings. Not because of discipline, though discipline is everything, but because conversation is a warmth that soldiers cannot afford to waste before the first meal. You pull on your damp wool tunic, rough to the skin, and then your worn leather belt. The lorica segmentata, the segmented armor of Roman tradition, feels heavier here. Not because it has changed, but because you have. The daily routine is rigid, not because it works, but because it is all that stands between the soldiers and madness. You march, you eat, you train, you repair the wall, you patrol, you sleep. There is no glory in your patrols. The barbarians are shadows rarely seen, rarely heard, but always present. They do not scream and charge like in the stories told to recruits. They watch. They melt into the hills like mist. Your job is not to fight them. Your job is to look like you could. You are a statue in motion, a symbol more than a soldier. And so you march along the parapets, spear in hand, eyes to the tree line that never ends. Breakfast is a bitter affair. barley gruel, perhaps a strip of salted meat if the quartermaster has remembered to ration fairly this week. You eat it with a carved wooden spoon you've been carrying for months. A spoon more personal than any weapon you own. The barracks are built to house 10, but you live with 17. The others smell like damp leather and unwashed feet, and so do you. The fires don't warm as much as they pretend to. You sit shoulder to shoulder with men you barely know, men who speak Latin with strange accents, Lyrians, Moors, Syrians. The empire is everywhere and nowhere, and so are you. Training begins after the meal. Drills on the practice field, running through formations you could do in your sleep. Shield up, step forward, thrust, withdraw, turn, again and again. It is not about skill. It is about obedience, repetition, rhythm. You train not for victory, but for memory, to make the body remember what the mind might forget under stress. Sweat mixes with the chill, forming a slick armor of its own. If you're lucky, you won't be picked to clear the latrines today. If you're not, you'll spend the better part of the afternoon with a wooden shovel, your nose buried in the acrid scent of decay. Hadrian's wall stretches 80, roaming miles from coast to coast, about 117 of the modern kind, but you only ever know a few miles of it. Your fort, your mile castle, your patrol zone. That is your entire world. Every few weeks, a cohort is rotated south, but promotions are rare and transfers rarer still. You were stationed here after a minor disciplinary infraction. You will likely die here, not in battle, but in routine, exposure, disease, time. These are the real enemies. Your centurion does not yell. He does not need to. His silence is weightier than commands. He has eyes like polished iron and a limp from an old campaign in Dacia. You do not know his name. He is only centurion. At inspection, he passes each man like a wraith, checking for dirt under fingernails, rust on helmets, slack in posture. Once, a recruit smirked during inspection. He was transferred, or at least that's what the others say. Atea, no one asks questions. Midday brings a brief pause. You chew on hard bread, dip it in thin soup, and watch the rain thread itself through the gaps in the wood above. The rain in Britannia does not fall. It seeps, snakes. It becomes a presence in your bones. It becomes memory. Some say it never truly stops, just pauses long enough for you to forget what dryness feels like. Your cloak is heavy with it. Your boots are soaked through. You feel like a sponge pretending to be a man. Evening comes, not with fanfare, but with the quiet toll of a bronze bell. Supper is much like breakfast, only darker. The barracks are filled with the muffled sounds of fatiguing noisy silence, the clink of gear being oiled, the coughs of men too proud to ask for a medicus. You polish your gladius out of habit, not necessity. It has not left its scabbard in over a month. You touch its hilt often though, as if to remind yourself that you still possess something sharp in a dull world. You are issued a candle once a week. You guard it with your life. Fire is not just warm. Tit is light, scent, identity. You light it only when truly needed, shielding it from the drafts that move through the barracks like ghosts. Sometimes you use it to write letters you never send. You scratch messages in charcoal onto discarded scraps of parchment, knowing full well they will be burned before ever reaching the southern roads. Still, you're right. I am here. I am still here. I remember your voice. It helps a little. Night watch is not punishment. 'Tis escape. When it's your turn, you welcome it. The solitude, the hush, the dark beauty of the north. You walk the parapet slowly, torch in hand, feeling the cold air fill your lungs like a baptism. The wall stretches into the distance, disappearing into fog. Below, the land dips into quiet hills, black shapes shifting in the wind. Sometimes you imagine figures moving among the trees. Sometimes you wish they would. Sleep comes poorly. The straw mattress smells of mildew. Your body aches from the drills. Your mind spins with thoughts that serve no purpose. And above all, there is the cold that has no beginning and no end. The cold that waits, silent and patient, for your defenses to lower. K, but you do not surrender to it. K, you curl inward, whisper an old prayer in a dead language, and close your eyes. Somewhere beyond the wall, the wild waits. But for now, you are the wall. You are the frost. You are the silence, K, and the empire sleeps through your watch. The road is never truly dry beneath your feet. Even in midsummer, even under a rare break in the sky, where a faint thread of pale gold filters through the mist. The ground along the frontier remains sodden, the soil reluctant to firm up, as if the land itself resents your marching. Each step squelches, not crisply like on the gravel roads of Italy, but in a dull, sucking rhythm, like walking through something that does not want you there. And that, more than the orders barked at dawn or the weight of your gear, is what haunts you most during the endless patrols. The land itself seems to resist your presence. It does not want you. It never has. And still, you march. Patrol begins well before the horizon makes itself known. Your segment, 12 men in all, is assigned to a northern perimeter loop of 6 mile, trudge through wet bracken, overgrown trails, and stretches of treeless, open moor. You fall into formation as if summoned by some ancient muscle memory. Right foot forward. Left hand on shield, eyes ahead. The silence among you is not ornament, it's preservation. Talking on patrol wastes energy and invites the unpredictable. Your comrades breathe evenly, their armor clinking in a strangely comforting rhythm. No one complains. No one falls behind. It is not bravery. It is conditioning. The centurion leading the patrol is barely older than you. His armor is cleaner. His voice carries more weight, but his eyes are the same dull, sleep-starved, cautious. He gestures with one hand, a slow sweep to the right, signaling the path through the small glade where visibility drops and the land dips sharply. The trees in this part of the countryside grow with twisted, wind-bitten limbs. Branches hang low over the trail, scraping gently across helmets and shields with a whispering sound that feels altogether too human. You've passed through here before, and every time feels like walking through a corridor built not of wood, but of waiting. Beyond the glade lies the open scrubland, wasteland of half-dead grass, scattered stones, and hills so gentle they might lull the eye into false comfort. But no one drops their guard here. The locals, those who refuse Roman rule, sometimes watch from this stretch. Not warriors, not like the stories say, not honorable enemies in gleaming war paint, but gaunt-eyed, half-starved figures wrapped in cloaks of animal hide, so still they could pass for standing stones until they move. You rarely see them up close. They vanish the moment you change direction. Their absence, their silence is more terrifying than arrows. As you ascend the next hill, the wind begins again, with violence, but with insistence. It rises like breath from the land, curling around your face and through the chinks in your armor, reminding you that warmth is temporary, that comfort is an illusion. The standard you march behind flutters, a square of faded red, catching the gusts with a defiance that feels almost comical. Rome's eagle insignia, proud and unyielding, held high on a wooden pole, means nothing out here. It is not a symbol of power. It is a banner that reminds you that someone, somewhere, still expects you to die well. You pass a milestone, a carved hunk of stone so weathered that its inscriptions are now merely gouges in gray rock. It once marked territory, declared the reach of Rome in proud Latin script. Now, it looks more like a warning. It's a kind of warning the locals might heed more than you. You step around it without thought, your boots pressing into moss that has grown over the road's edge, and continue, always forward. By midday, the rain arrives. It does not fall as it does in the city's no sudden showers or thunderous downpours. It begins like a mist, so fine and formless you barely register it. But after an hour, your tunic is soaked, your pack heavier, your shoulders bowed beneath the sheer insistence of the water. Your fingers wrinkle, the metal of your sword hilt grows slick. And still, you march. One of the newer recruits begins to limp. A small finger blister turned infection, a misstep on uneven stones. You do not stop for him. There is no time. He tries to keep pace, biting his lip until blood smears down his chin, but the pain is obvious. The centurion glances back once, then forward again. The march does not break for weakness. Eventually, you reach the outer checkpointer, wooden watchtower perched on a low rise, barely taller than a farmhouse. A pair of guards stationed here nod as you approach. They do not speak. Their eyes are hollow from standing duty in isolation. One of them holds a crude carved pendant in his hand, a religious token, not Roman, something local, something pagan. He stares at it with quiet reverence, and you wonder how many gods you would pray to if you thought even one might answer. You stop briefly to eat cold meat and barley cakes packed before the patrol began. Your hands shake slightly from the cold, but you say nothing. No one does. Sky above is the same blank gray as when you left, and you find yourself wishing for a storm, or even lightning, anything to break the monotony. But there is nothing. Only drizzle, only hills. Only the wall behind you and the unknown ahead. The return march is no easier. The ground you covered earlier has grown more treacherous. Your boots slide in the mud. The wind is behind you now, shoving you forward like an impatient officer, Fatigue creeps up from your calves, into your thighs, into your spine. Your breathing becomes audible. The ache behind your eyes grows. And then, as you descend into the glade again, you hear something, a sound, not quite a cry, not quite a cough. You all freeze. The centurion raises his hand. The column halts. No one speaks. You listen. Wind, water dripping from branches, and something else. A rustle, a whisper of motion in the undergrowth. Then silence again. The formation tightens. Shields rise. Hands go to swords. You wait for a moment that feels like an hour. Nothing. The centurion signals. And you begin moving again, more slowly now. Eyes scanning the tree line with unnatural focus. Every leaf becomes a threat. Every shadow a potential ambush. But nothing comes. The land keeps its secrets. It always does. By the time you return to the fort, the sun has already dipped behind the clouds again, and twilight has begun to settle. The gates creak open, and the guards at the wall house nod without expression. You re-enter the world of stone, of duty, of routine. The march is over, but your body still moves with its rhythm. You feel it in your spine, in your teeth, in the tips of your fingers. The march never truly ends. It echoes in you. Inside the barracks, the fire is low, but the light is welcome. You peeled off your gear slowly, piece by piece, each strap and buckle heavier than you remember. Your feet throb. Your eyes sting. You sit in silence and eat what little rations remain. No one congratulates anyone. There are no medals, no commendations. You did your duty. You marched. And you will do it again tomorrow, because the wall demands it. When the hunger strikes, it doesn't arrive as a roar or a sharp pang, but as a creeping dullness, a slow narrowing of thought, a kind of gray fog that wraps itself around your skull and makes everything command's duties, movement, feel like dragging a boulder through molasses. It hits hardest, not on the march, but in the silence after, when your body begins to feel the full cost of its labor and reaches inward for reserves that no longer exist. By the time you return to your barracks after a patrol or night watch at the gate, your stomach is more than emptied, feels hollowed out, scraped clean, like a drum that echoes with every movement of your limbs. And then it is time to eat, but eat what? Exactly. The Roman army fed its soldiers with remarkable consistency and a kind of indifferent efficiency designed not for pleasure or comfort, but for endurance, for sustaining the minimum necessary strength to continue functioning as a cog in the imperial machine. You eat not to be satisfied, but to survive. Rations are distributed weekly, and they almost never change unless supplies are short, and then they simply shrink. Your share includes hard barley or wheatoffen in the form of unground grain that you must grind yourself using a heavy, primitive stone quern. The task is slow, backbreaking, and humiliating in its tedium, especially after a day spent marching, fighting, or freezing your bones half to death on some cursed corner of the wall. Once you've ground the grain into something resembling flour, not fine, not soft, but gritty and coarse, you mix it with water and a little salt, if you're lucky, and bake it over a fire as a kind of unleavened biscuit. It's dry, dense, and hard enough to blunt a dagger. This is Panis militarist, the military bread, your constant companion, your most dependable misery. To wash it down, there's pasca, a sour wine vinegar concoction diluted with water, meant to disinfect and hydrate at once, but tasting like the runoff from a bathhouse gutter. It burns on the way down and makes your lips pucker involuntarily, but you drink it anyway, because there's little else. The meat ration, when available, is often dried or salted pork heavily preserved to last in the damp air of Britannia. It is chewy, stringy, and so briny it leaves your mouth dry. It is sometimes so tough that chewing becomes a prolonged ordeal. And more than once, you've witnessed grown men give up halfway through a strip of meat and toss it aside. Not out of wastefulness, but out of resignation. If the weather is kind, and your sentry happens to be on good terms with the fort's kitchen slaves, you might receive a thin gruel of legumes seeming and vaguely nourishing, though the taste remains stubbornly bland. There is rarely spice, rarely flavor, and never variety. Vegetables are rare, and, when present, often wilted. You might get a few onions, garlic, cloves, or bitter herbs mixed into your meals, if there's been a recent delivery from the south, but more often you subsist on the basics pulses, grain, and meat when it hasn't spoiled. Fresh fruit is almost mythical here in the shadow of the wall, and dairy milk, cheese. Butter's practically non-existent unless you barter with locals or steal from a nearby farmstead. And even then, you risk punishment, or worse, poisoning. Cooking your rations is your own responsibility, unless you're stationed in a larger castra with communal preparation areas. Each contubernum, the basic unit of 8 men, prepares their own meals. You cook over smoky fires that leave your tunic reeking of ash, using pots that have long since blackened with soot, and use whatever stale oil or rendered animal fat is available to keep things from sticking. Your fingers, numb with cold or cracked from exposure, fumble with knives as you try to slice dried meat or mash beans. The fire barely keeps the chill away, and the wind always finds a way to blow smoke directly into your eyes. You cough, you blink, and you stir. Always stirring. There are nights, though, where fortune turns slightly in your favor. Perhaps a deer was caught in a hunting trap near the woods, or a shipment from the south brought with it amphory of Corinth, the pungent Roman fish sauce that, though acrid and strange, turns a dull meal into something almost palatable. Or maybe a local trader, desperate to avoid Roman taxation, sold off some root vegetables for cheap, and the camp cooks have thrown them into a communal stew. On these nights, the air in the fort carries a warmth it usually lacks, a savory scent that reminds you, just barely, of a home that probably no longer exists. Still, these moments are the exception. Most meals are eaten in silence, on wooden benches inside damp barracks, where you hunch over your bowl like a starving dog, chewing quickly, swallowing hard, and bracing yourself for whatever duty comes next. There is little conversation during meals. Hunger dulls the tongue. The only sounds are the scrape of spoon against wood, the crunch of undercooked grain, and the occasional grunt as someone shifts position on the cold stone floor. And yet, even these meager meals are precious. You guard your rations fiercely. Theft is punished severely, okay? And there are always those who hoard, who eat faster than others, okay? Who eye their neighbors' portions with quiet calculation. Brotherhood among soldiers is real, but hunger tests it. The line between camaraderie and competition blurs when food is scarce. You dream of hot meals, okay? Of stews rich with lamb, of fresh bread, soft enough to tear with your fingers, okay? Of cheese that melts on the tongue, of fruit so ripe it drips with juice. But here, near the edge of the empire, in this land of damp mists and biting wind, food is not about pleasure, okay? It is about function, and sometimes even that feels like a luxury. Case, what you eat is not a feast. It is a reminder that you are not home, that you are not free, and that this wall, this garrison, this life, it owns you completely. Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we journey through the quieter, harsher corners of the past in long, immersive narratives designed to help you relax, drift off, and maybe learn something along the way. Tonight, we're still stationed at the misty edge of the Roman Empire in the bleak, windswept frontier of northern Britain, assigned as a low-ranking Roman legionary guarding the great, crumbling length of Hadrian's wall. In the last part, you tasted the grim meals that kept soldiers just barely alive. Now, the sun has gone down, the embers in the hearths have cooled, and we turn to the long, endless nights. You're expected to survive nights so cold, so loud, and so miserable they could drive a man to madness. As the weak gray daylight fades behind the distant hills and the moorland mists begin to creep in from the north, the temperature plummets with almost theatrical cruelty, as though the gods themselves are intent on punishing every exposed inch of flesh. The walls of the stone barracks are damp and unforgiving, built for permanence and not for comfort. There is no insulation, no glass in the windows, no chimney flue to carry away the smoke-just rough stone and wooden beams that groan with the cold. Wind whistles through the cracks like the wailing of spirits, and frost creeps silently across your belongings, painting your boots and shield with a thin crust of white before you've even had time to remove your armor. You lie on a wooden bunkiff, lucky stuffed with straws, so old and matted it smells like wet animal fur, a smell that never quite leaves your nostrils. The blanket issued to you is made of coarse wool, more whole than fabric, and stiff with months of sweat, blood, mildew, possibly the remnants of some forgotten plague. You wrap yourself tightly in it, curling into a fetal position, trying to trap your body heat, but it's no use. The wind seeps in through the stone walls. The cold radiates up from the earth itself, climbing your spine, numbing your toes, and turning your fingers to brittle sticks. Sleep does not come easily. Even if your body is exhausted, your muscles sore from drills, your stomach tight with hunger, your feet still blistered from the last forced march. The discomfort overwhelms everything. Your back aches from the hard plank you're lying on, and no position feels right. Every turn is met with the creak of wood, the rustle of straw, or the groan of another soldier trying to find rest in the same impossible conditions. Some men snore heavily, Others mutter in dreams, and a few cough through the night deep, sweat coughs that echo through the barracks and serve as a grim reminder that death is never far from this place. There is no silence here, not really. The fort doesn't sleep. Somewhere outside the thin protection of your shared quarters. The night patrols march the perimeter with torches in hand, boots crunching on frozen mud. The dogs bark in short, startled bursts, alert to every rustling bush and shifting shadow. The sentries whisper to each other, their breath hanging in the cold air like spirits. Beyond the wall, the wilderness looms black, impenetrable, and full of unseen dangers. You listen for the sounds of barbarian war cries, though none come, not tonight. Still, the fear lives in your chest, a slow pounding drumbeat you carry even in your sleep, okay? And then, of course, there's the matter of the watches. You do not get a full night's sleep. Each contubenamur, 8-man unit is responsible for night duty and rotation. When it's your turn, you are shaken awake long before your body has recovered, long before the fire has been rekindled or the frost has melted from your helmet. You dress in silence, trembling, your teeth chattering uncontrollably as you strap on your sword, sling your shield, and pull your damp, frozen cloak tied across your shoulders. You stumble out into the open yard, where the sky above is vast and black and utterly indifferent to your suffering. Your post might be on the wall itself, standing on a crumbling parapet, looking out toward the north, or at a gatehouse, or patrolling the ditch line with a torch that casts more shadow than light. The cold is unbearable, the hours long. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep the blood moving, but the chill finds you anyway. You begin to hallucinate shapes in the dark, movement at the edge of vision, and it becomes harder and harder to tell what is real and what is a dream. You nod off while standing, only to jerk awake seconds later when your knees buckle beneath you. And when your relief finally comes, you shuffle back to your bunk, not so much asleep as simply collapsed. There are mornings when you wake to find your water skin frozen solid, days when your fingers are so stiff with cold that you cannot buckle your armor properly, and someone must help you. Some men lose digits to frostbite. Some go mad, stripping naked in the snow in the grip of some fever dream or exhaustion-induced delirium. A few desert entirely, vanishing into the mist. Their fates, unknown, consumed by the forest, or caught and executed, or worse, taken by tribes who see no reason to treat captured Romans with anything but contempt. You tell yourself that the night will end, that the sun will rise, that the relief horn will blow. But in those long, freezing hours before dawn, all you can do is endure. You bury your face in your threadbare cloak. You hold your breath to warm your own chest. You praise sometimes to Roman gods, sometimes to any deity that might be listening, because here, beyond the wall, sleep is not peace. Sleep is survival, and some nights, survival is the hardest duty of all. The morning doesn't begin with the rising of the sun. It begins with the harsh cry of the horn, a raw brain call that shatters whatever scraps of sleep you manage to cling to during the long and frozen night. There is no gentle waking, no warm light filtering through curtains, no slow easing into consciousness. It's immediate and jarring. One moment you are numb, and still the next, you are pulling on cold, stiff armor with trembling fingers. Gulping down sour pasca or a mouthful of barley paste and preparing to march once again, your body aching before the first step is even taken. And once it begins, the marching never stops. The command comes down through the ranks without discussion. Today is a training march, or a patrol through the wilderness beyond the wall, or perhaps reinforcement for another fort along the frontier. It doesn't really matter why. The result is the same. You march because Rome tells you to march. You march because the empire moves forward only on the backs of exhausted men who do not dare to stop. You march because the alternative is punishment or, worse, dishonor. Your kit is heavy upwards of 40 kilograms strapped to your back, slung across your chest, and held in your hands. There's your shield, your gladius, your pylons, your helmet, your tools, your rations, your cloak, and sometimes even a shovel or pickaxe for digging fortifications when you arrive at your destination. It is a mobile burden designed to transform you into a walking fortress, but it weighs on your spine with every brutal step. Your feet are wrapped in caligae, open-toed Roman military sandals studded with iron hobnails. They provide excellent traction on hard ground, but very little in the way of comfort or protection. The thin leather rubs against your skin until the skin blisters and then tears. Dirt and small stones work their way into every fold of fabric and leather. Rain softens everything into a slippery pulp, then dries into stiff, crusty ridges that bite at your skin with every movement. You feel your own blood wetting the inside of your sandals by the second mile, but there is no time to stop. No pause for inspection. No sympathy. Okay, you march in formation, shoulder to shoulder, rank upon rank. K, the rhythm of boots on packed earth, forming a kind of drumbeat that haunts you long after the day ends. You are expected to maintain posture, spacing, discipline. If someone stumbles or lags, the centurion lashes out with his Vaitza thick fine staff without hesitation or warning. The pace never slackens. The line must not break, and so you press forward, even when your legs tremble, even when your breath comes in gasps, even when your stomach churns from the sour dregs of the morning's rations. The landscape is brutal. Northern Britannia offers no kindness to weary legs. 1 hour, you refording a stream waist deep in icy water that soaks your tunic and numbs your limbs. The next, you're ascending a stony incline that seems to stretch toward the clouds. Each step a battle against gravity and your own collapsing will. The weather changes without notice. The clouds darken. Rain pelts your helmet. Wind whips across the moors like a blade, cutting through cloak and tunic until your skin is raw. And still, you march. Conversation is discouraged. Singing is forbidden. Key. The only voices come from the officers, shouting commands, correcting formations, barking threats. Occasionally, an older veteran murmurs a grim joke to the man beside him, but even that fades as exhaustion sets in. The column stretches for hundreds of meters, snaking through hills and valleys, a living symbol of Roman control in a land that has never fully submitted. Local tribes watch from the hills, unseen but present, their eyes taking the measure of your force, their silence a kind of warning. You don't know when they'll strike. You just know they will. Blisters pop, and the open wounds rub raw against the stiff edges of your caligae. Some men stuff cloth or moss into the gaps to soften the blow, but it only delays the inevitable. The blood seeps through, darkening the leather, streaking your footsteps behind you in a quiet, desperate trail. Your thighs burn, your shoulders ache, your neck feels like a rusted hinge. The weight never eases, the rhythm never breaks. Noon. There is no real pause, just a brief command to stop, stand, and eat while still in formation. You chew dry bread and gulp down lukewarm water while standing in the mud, trying not to collapse. You do not sit. You do not stretch, okay? And before your legs, remember what rest feels like. The command is given again, march, and you obey. Hour after hour passes in a haze of pain and repetition. Your world narrows to the next footfall, the next breath, the next command. Time becomes meaningless. You begin to hallucinate. Trees bend in strange shapes. Shadows dance across the ground. The road seems to stretch longer the closer you get to its end. You're not marching through Britain anymore. You're marching through your own body, through its limits, through its thresholds, through every small rebellion your muscles try to wage against your will. By the time you finally stop, you are no longer a man. You are a husk, a tool, a thing that has moved through space on command. Your feet are swollen and cracked. Your calves twitch involuntarily. Your back feels like it's made of glass. You try to lift your pack from your shoulders, but it clings to you like a second skin. You are not allowed to rest just yet. First, you dig latrines, ditches, foundations, whatever the officers demand. Only when the camp is established, the fires are lit, and the watch rotations set, are you permitted to collapse into sleep. But sleep, of course, brings no relief. And tomorrow, it begins again. You march not to conquer, but to be conquered, not by enemies, but by the road itself. By now, your body is bruised and blistered, your eyes red with fatigue, and your stomach twisted from poor rations and worse weather. But what truly breaks your spirit as a Roman legionary on Hadrian's wall is not the bitter cold, the bone-deep exhaustion, or even the pain in your bleeding feet. It is the ever-present threat of discipline, the looming fear of punishment so harsh and unrelenting that it reshapes how you breathe, move, speak, and think. In the Roman army, punishment is not just a tool, it is a culture, a doctrine, and a weapon used just as ruthlessly as the sword. There is no privacy in a Roman fort. You live in a cramped contubernum with 7 others, and every action you take is monitored, not only by your officers, but by your fellow soldiers, who are encouraged to report disobedience and deviation. Disloyalty to the unit is met with contempt, but disloyalty to Rome is met with the whip, the cudgel, or the sword. The very air you breathe is conditioned by this invisible authority, this ever-tightening grip on your soul. You are told that you are the shield of civilization, but in truth, you are gear in a machine that never stops turning, and should you slip out of rhythm, even slightly, that machine will crush you without hesitation. The most common form of punishment is flogging, a swift, brutal whipping delivered in full view of the camp. A minor offense such as neglecting your gear, dozing off during watch, or speaking out of turn may earn Q. A lashing so vicious that your back becomes a lattice of bleeding welts torn open by the sharp bite of the flagrum. Q are stripped to the waist and bound your face pressed into the cold earth or a wooden post. And the whip descends with mechanical rhythm. Each strike timed and witnessed, each shriek swallowed by the cold indifference of your comrades who do not look away. They've seen it before. They will see it again. And someday it may be them. But this is merely the beginning. Severe infractions, cowardice in battle, mutiny, theft from your comrades, invite punishment that grows darker, older, more ritualistic. There is decimation, perhaps the most feared sentence in all of Rome. Should a unit be judged cowardly or rebellious, the commander may order 1 in every 10 soldiers to be executed, not by enemy hands, but by their own brothers in arms. Names are drawn by lot. The unlucky man dragged forward, stripped of his dignity, and beaten to death with clubs and stones by the very men he trained, ate, and marched beside. No one is spared the trauma. No one forgets. It is a punishment designed not only to kill, but to infect the memory of everyone involved, to bind the survivors together in guilt and silence, and to ensure that no one ever forgets what the empire can do to its own. Even lesser penalties carry deep scars. For failing to keep your weapons clean, you may be assigned to latrine duty for weeks on end, cleaning out the waste pits that swarm with flies and fester with the stench of hundreds of unwashed men. For losing your helmet or shield, you may be forced to stand outside the gates all day in full armor, regardless of rain or snow, without food. For falsifying records or giving false witness, you may be branded, your forehead burned with hot iron to mark you as a liar for the rest of your service. In this world, shame is carved into flesh as a warning. You must always be alert. Always be precise. Your armor must be spotless, your sword oiled and sharp, your behavior impeccable. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not hesitate at commands. You do not question orders, even if they send you into the wilderness without supplies or into a skirmish against impossible odds. The centurion does not care about your fear. The optio does not care about your injuries. If you falter, you suffer. If you disobey, you die. And yet, the punishments are not limited to the battlefield or the camp. Even off duty, a soldier's life is constrained. You are not permitted to marry while serving, though many do in secret, forming unofficial families that the empire refuses to recognize. If discovered, your wife may be exiled or sold into servitude, and your children declared illegitimate, forbidden from inheriting anything you leave behind. You are forbidden from engaging in business, from owning land, from wearing civilian clothes without permission. You are a soldier and nothing more, not a husband, not a father, not even truly a man in the eyes of Roman law. You are property of the state. The fear doesn't fade with time. In fact, it deepens. Veterans may know the system better, may learn how to navigate its cruelty more efficiently. But the weight of what they've seen, the floggings, the executions, the suicides, settles into their bones like the chill of the northern wind. Some lose themselves in discipline, becoming more rigid, more brutal, hoping to stay ahead of the punishment by embracing its logic. Others become hollow, moving through the motions of service with dead eyes, numb to everything but survival. A few drink themselves into oblivion, gulping cheap wine or strong vinegar to dull the edge of their memories. You begin to understand that Roman discipline is not just a set of rules. It is a form of engineering designed to break the individual and shape what remains into a perfectly functioning component of the imperial war machine. There is no room for mercy, no space for error, and the threat of punishment is not something you escape. It is something you carry with you, in the tightness of your jaw, in the stiffness of your spine, in the way you flinch at every shout or unexpected noise. You do not simply fear it, you live in it, okay? And so, you sleep lightly, walk carefully, obey immediately, and pray. Not for victory, but for invisibility. 'Cause, in the Roman army, to be noticed is to risk being destroyed. The day begins like any other, with cold breath rising from your lips as you strap on your armor in the pre-dawn gloom. Your fingers numb and your joints stiff with the aching grip of damp northern air. The fire from the barracks hearth has long since died, and you barely had time to chew your barley porridge before the signal horn called you to the watchtower. The wall stretches behind you like a giant scar across the wild, barren land, an endless line of stone dividing Rome from everything it deems uncivilized. Okay? And out there, somewhere in the mist, beyond the turf and the trees, something is watching, waiting. It's 4 weeks now. The mood in the camp has been different. The officers speak in tight, hushed tones. Riders have arrived from distant forts and left again without fanfare. Rations are cut short, weapons inspected more frequently, and drills stretch into the darkness. You've seen the signal torches burning late into the night. Rumors swirl among the men, whispers of a confederation of northern tribes gathering beyond the wall. Picts and others whose names you do not know, whose languages you cannot understand, only that they hate Rome and everything it represents. The land beyond is no longer empty. It is watching you, and soon it will strike. The first sign comes with the silence. A silence so complete it rings in your ears. No birdsong, no wind, no rustling of branches in the woods. Just stillness, like the earth holding its breath. Then the horn sounds, not for drill, not for ceremony, but the long, guttural blast that means only one thing: attack. And suddenly, the world explodes. From the tree line comes a wave of sound and motion. Hundreds, maybe thousands of shapes pouring from the fog, half naked, howling, their bodies painted blue and black, their weapons crude but deadly. Okay, they are fast, faster than you expected, not like the images shown in training scrolls. Okay, they come with fury in their eyes, fire in their hearts, and hatred older than the wall itself. And for a moment, you do not think, you simply react. hand on sword, his feet moving, body turning, shouting out commands you barely understand. The discipline drilled into you through fear and repetition is all that holds your limbs together. Arrows rain down on the wall, bouncing off stone and wood, some finding soft flesh. You hear screams already. A young auxiliary by the gate takes a spear to the gut and collapses in a heap, his blood steaming against the frost-bitten earth. The gates are shaking, rammed by logs or pulled by grappling hooks. Rocks hurtle from slings and catapults. Fire begins to bloom at the base of the wooden watchtower, not by accident, but as part of a strategy. You've never imagined they'd be this organized. You hold the ramparts, shield raised, sword drawn, heart pounding so hard you're afraid it will burst through your chest. You cannot hear anything clearly. Not your comrades, not your commanders. Only the chaos around you, the clang of iron on iron, the dull thud of projectiles, the horrifying gurgles of dying men. The enemy scales the wall with ladders, and the fighting becomes close, personal. A man leaps over the parapet and lands almost atop you, his teeth bared in a snarl. You parry, barely, and stab without grace, without form, just to survive. You do not know if he dies. You move on because you must. This is no drill. This is no campaign in Pharaoh of Gaul or Germania, where the legions sweep across farmland and execute tactics like textbook exercises. This is feral, primal warfare. You are no longer fighting for Rome. You are fighting for the next minute of breath. Okay, the wall is supposed to protect you, but now it feels like a cage. You cannot retreat. You cannot run. The enemy is everywhere, even inside the fort now, having breached the southern gate. You see tents burning, horses fleeing, more soldiers falling. And yet, in the midst of the horror, the chain of command does not break. The centurions rallied the remaining troops to the central courtyard. You are forced into a tight formation, shoulder to shoulder again, shield locked, gladi stabbing out in brutal synchronization. Your world narrows once more to the reach of your sword, the weight of your armor, the iron smell of blood and burning wood. You no longer think about the enemy as people. They are shapes. They are shadows. They are obstacles to your continued existence. Hours pass, or maybe only minutes. Time ceases to be real. Your arm aches from swinging. Your shield is dented. Your tunic soaked in blood. Some of it yours, most of it not. A burning rafter crashes behind you, nearly knocking you down. The wall has become a furnace, a battleground, a tomb. But finally, mercifully, the horn blows again. Short bursts, this time the signal for retreat or regroup. Reinforcements have arrived from a neighboring fort. You barely see them through the smoke and haze, but their arrival turns the tide. The attackers pull back, slowly at first, then with growing urgency, disappearing into the trees once again, their cries fading into the distance. You remain standing, barely, round you. The dead litter the ground. Friends you shared bread with 2 nights ago lie still, their faces pale and open-eyed. Horses scream in pain, their riders crushed beneath them. Flames crackle through the camp. the wall holds, but only just. And you, a Roman soldier stationed at the edge of the known world, realize that even with all the might and discipline of the empire, you are never truly safe. Hadrian's Wall is not a barrier. It is a promise that what lies beyond must never be allowed to enter. But now, you've seen the truth. The wall cannot hold forever. And next time, you might not be so lucky. As the sun sets once again over the bleak northern horizon and the last wisps of smoke from the battle drift upward into the darkening sky, you find yourself stumbling back toward your barracks, your legs aching, your body bruised and battered, and your soul worn thin. The adrenaline has long since drained from your system, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell where a soldier is supposed to be. You've survived another day, and just barely, but now you must confront the other enemy that lurks behind the gates and inside your own skin. The punishing grip of cold, the ravages of illness, and the impossibility of true rest. Night on Hadrian's Wall is unlike any other night you have ever known. It is not merely dark, it is void, vast and heavy, like a blanket soaked in sorrow and frost draped over your entire world. The stars offer no warmth, no hope, only a reminder of how far away civilization truly is. The wind does not howl, it whispers, thin and cutting, sliding through the cracks in the stone like a thief, stealing your body heat by inches. You retreat to your barracks, not for comfort, there is none, but for shelter. Inside, the air is still damp, the walls weeping moisture, the straw mattresses crawling with lice, the corners blackened with mold, and the fire little more than a flickering promise of warmth. You remove your armor slowly, wincing at every new bruise, every cut you hadn't noticed until now. There's no one to help you. If you're lucky, a fellow soldier might toss you a rag soaked in vinegar to cleanse your wounds. If not, you sleep as you are, bleeding, cold, and filthy. And yet, sleep does not come, not easily, not here. Your eyes may close, your body may collapse, but your mind remains alert. It's twitching at every distant footfall, every creaking beam, every gust of wind that sounds just a little too much like a scream. You've seen too much. You've felt too much. Dreams, when they come, are not sweet. They are broken, scattered images of fire and blood, of home and memory, of things you lost and things you never had. Sometimes you dream of marching endlessly, of your boots sinking into bogs with every step, the faces of fallen comrades staring up at you from beneath the frozen earth. Sometimes you wake in the middle of the night, unsure of where you are, your hand grasping for a sword that isn't there, your heart thundering with invisible panic. And sometimes you don't wake at all, not until the bugle blows at dawn and your body groans in protest, as if it had never rested at all. But sleeplessness is not the only torment. The cold wears you down, hour by hour, night by night, sapping your will and seeping into your bones. Even the thickest cloaks do little against the wet northern winds that find every weakness in your clothing, every threadbare seam. Frostbite is common. Your fingers go numb, your toes blacken. The latrines freeze over. Your breath clings to your beard in icy clusters. Okay, the fort becomes a frost-rimmed tomb, and each morning you awaken unsure if all of your limbs will still respond to you. And then comes the sickness, slowly at first, then with devastating speed. The conditions of the fort are ripe for disease. The men are packed tightly together, the air is foul, the food barely warm, and hygiene nearly non-existent. Latrines overflow, cuts fester, water barrels collect slime. You cannot recall the last time you truly bathed. So fevers spread like fire in dry grass. A cough here, a rash there, and then half your cohort is groaning in their beds, their faces pale, their bodies soaked in sweat. The healers offer little, vinegar, herbs, leeches. None of it helps. There is no concept of germs, no understanding of infection. Illness is seen as weakness, as punishment from the gods, as bad fortune, and often the sick are simply left to die in silence. You begin to understand that here, at the edge of empire, sleep is a battlefield of its own. To sleep is to risk freezing, to fall deeper into sickness, to lose precious awareness that might save your life. And yet, you must sleep. You must rest, somehow, for without it, your body will fail. Your mind will unravel. You'll make a mistake in the field, drop your sword, fall from the wall, forget your orders, and then you will be punished, or killed, or both. There are stories told in whispers. Late at night, when the guards are distracted, stories of men who went mad from the cold and the dreams, who walked out into the woods barefoot and naked, speaking in tongues, stories of ghosts haunting the northern towers. Roman spirits who died without honor and now linger, trapped by their failure. Whether or not you believe these tales, it's hard to deny the atmosphere of dread that hangs over the fort like mist. Something about this place seeps into you, changes you, leaves its mark. You arrived here, a citizen, a soldier, a man of Rome, but every night you become a little less of those things and a little more like the wall itself, cracked, worn, and perpetually braced for the next attack. And so you lie down once more in the lice-ridden straw, clutching your cloak to your chest, your sword within arm's reach. And you whisper a prayer to a god you barely believe in anymore, not for glory, not for victory, but simply for another dawn. Welcome back, weary traveler, to the edge of Rome and beyond. If you've managed to survive a night in a freezing barracks along Hadrian's wall, you may now wonder who was behind the vast effort to conquer this strange, stubborn land. Who was the mind, the force, the iron will that pushed Roman control into the mist-shrouded isles of Britannia? For that, we must go back, not to a soldier on the wall, but to a man of command, cunning, and calculation. His name was Gnaeus Julius Agricola. He did not build the wall, but he paved the blood-soaked road to its very foundation. And in his rise, we see not just the story of one man, but the story of how Rome tried to tame the untamable north. Agricola was born not among blood and battle, but in the polished corridors of privilege. The year was 40 AD, a time of imperial intrigue, ambition, and fear. His father was a senator, his mother from an old aristocratic family. in the Roman world. This meant he was destined to rise, not merely survive. He was educated in Massilia, modern-day Marseille, a blend of Roman structure and Greek intellect, where he was taught rhetoric, discipline, and duty. He was not, by any means, born a warrior, but like many Romans of his class, he would become one out of necessity, ambition, and perhaps something darker, the unrelenting desire to leave a mark that time could not erase. His career began, like many others, as a tribune, a young officer, learning the hard way what it meant to lead men in a world that cared little for book learning. But Agricola was quick, disciplined, and observant. He climbed the cursus honorum, the ladder of Roman political and military power, step by step, not always through charm, but through precision and quiet effectiveness. He served in Britain early, under Governor Suetonius Paulinus, just in time to witness one of the bloodiest uprisings in Roman Britain's history, the revolt of Boudica. It's impossible to understand Agricola without understanding this revolt. When Boudica, queen of the Iceni, rose up in fury after Rome abused and tortured her family, she unleashed a storm of destruction that left Roman settlements burning and thousands dead. Agricola, still a young officer, watched as Rome nearly lost a province. And from this fire, he learned two things. First, that the Britons were not to be underestimated. Second, that a Roman leader must never allow weakness, hesitation, or underestimation to bloom. Years later, having served in various posts across the empire, Agricola returned to Britain as governor, but not just any governor. He came at a time when Britannia was restive, fractured, and far from fully subdued. Many of his predecessors had taken the easy road: consolidate, fortify, and collect taxes. Agricola chose the harder path. He would not merely occupy Britain, he would conquer it, and not just the fertile south, but the wild, treacherous, and mountainous north, the land of Caledonia, where no Roman had ever truly prevailed. What made Agricola unique was his strategy. He was not merely a general, he was a psychological warrior. He understood that to control a people, you must do more than defeat them in the field. You must divide them, dazzle them, lure them into the Roman way. And when that failed, you must crush them so thoroughly they could never rise again. He built forts in the hinterlands, established roads to move troops quickly, constructed a network of communication and surveillance that stretched like a spider-esque web over the island. He brought Roman customs, schools, language, baths, all the hallmarks of civilization. But behind this veneer of culture was a blade. He marched his legions deeper into the north than any governor before him, pushing into modern-day Scotland, fighting tribes that had never bowed to Rome. His campaign culminated in the Battle of Mons Graupius, a shadowy, mythologized conflict where, according to Tacitus, the Roman legions slaughtered over 10,000 Caledonians while losing fewer than 400 of their own. It was a staggering claim, and while historians now debate the numbers and even the location of the battle, the psychological effect was real. Rome had struck deep into the heart of resistance, and the tribes scattered. But Agricola's triumph was not eternal. Rome, ever jealous of success that grows too brightly, we called him Emperor Domitian, feared his rising fame. Agricola was offered triumphal honors, but denied further command. He retired quietly, his career halted, his legacy unfinished, at least in life. For though his name faded into relative obscurity, it was his campaigns, his roads, and his vision that set the stage for Rome's eventual fortification of the frontier, including the eventual construction of Hadrian's wall. Though he never saw it, that wall bore his spirit, not a symbol of peace, but a line drawn in stone, blood, and frost. And so we remember Agricola, not just as a man, but as an engine of empire, one who embodied Rome's most ruthless traits and its most enduring ambitions. He is not remembered in statues or coins, but every soldier who froze on the wall, every tribe that fled into the mist, every settlement that bore Latin names in foreign soil, all were echoes of his relentless will. He rose in silence, conquered in shadow, and vanished from politics with barely a word. But his legacy stands, cold and unyielding, just like the stones of the wall he inspired. The year was a D60, and Rome had grown too confident, too certain of its grasp on distant Britannia, and in that arrogance forgot what all empires must learn, that the most dangerous enemy is the one who rises from humiliation, not hatred. But Agricola represented Rome's quiet calculation. Can Boudica was its thunderous reckoning, a queen forged by betrayal, crowned in blood, and destined to unleash a fury so great it would shake the very foundations of Roman rule in Britain. Her story is not a legend. It is a warning carved into ash and bone, a firestorm so ferocious it could have ended Roman Britain before it had even begun. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, was not born to rebellion. Her tribe, situated in the eastern part of Britain, had once been allies of Rome. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had attempted to walk the thin, treacherous line of Roman cooperation, a buffer state king under imperial shadow. In his will, Prasutagus left his kingdom jointly to his two daughters and to the Roman emperor, a desperate gambit for peace and preservation. But Rome does not share. It absorbs, seizes. When Prasutagus died, the Roman administrators came not with condolences, but with chains. They annexed the Iceni lands outright, plundered the nobles, enslaved the royal household, and, most harrowingly, flogged Boudica and raped her daughters. This was not merely conquest, it was humiliation, ritual, public, and intended as a warning to any Briton who might still cling to notions of sovereignty. But instead of cowing her people, it united them. What rose from the ashes of that injustice was not just rebellion, but vengeance, a fury that would turn towns to cinders and stain Roman honor forever. Boudica, tall, fierce-eyed, and flame-haired, according to Roman sources, became a living symbol of that rage. She gathered not just her own tribe, but others long simmering under Roman arrogance, the Trinovantes, the Cornavi, and more. She did not merely plan war, she summoned it. Her uprising began with fire. The first target was Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, a Roman colonia built atop conquered lands, complete with a temple to the Emperor Claudius and a settled community of Roman veterans who lorded over the native Britons. It was a soft, arrogant, richly appointed target. When Boudica's forces descended upon it, they left nothing standing. The temple burned, the settlers were slaughtered, but the Roman citizens were impaled, crucified, or flayed. No quarter was given, no mercy asked. Khan's message was clear. Rome had defiled her people. Now she would defile Rome. Next came Londinium, not yet the bustling capital it would become, but already a vital trading post and administrative center. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, had marched west to crush Druidic resistance on the Isle of Mona. But upon hearing of the rebellion, he doubled back. Faced with the choice of defending Londinium or abandoning it to save his forces, he chose the latter. He evacuated what he could and left the city to its fate. Boudica, riding at the head of her swelling horde, took it with ease. Londinium burned for days. The streets ran red. Roman merchants, officials, and families were dragged from their homes and executed with horrific precision. The fire left a black ash layer so thick it can still be found beneath the modern city today, a silent, smoldering witness to the queen's vengeance. Her forces moved onward, striking Verulamium, another Romanized town filled with symbols of foreign power. The slaughter continued, indiscriminate and brutal. Tacitus estimated that over 70,000 Roman citizens and allies were killed in the uprising. Dio Cassius claimed even more. The Romans were stunned. This was not a tribal skirmish. It was an existential crisis. An entire province teetered on collapse. And yet, amidst the fire, Rome responded with its signature iron. Paulinus, seasoned and ruthless, gathered what remained of the legions. He picked his battlefield carefully, somewhere along a narrow defile, perhaps Watling Street, flanked by forest and open land, minimizing Boudica's numerical advantage. There, the vastly outnumbered Roman force stood firm against Britain army, reportedly in the hundreds of thousands, though likely inflated by later chroniclers. What mattered was not the size of the army, but the clarity of the decision. Rome would either regain control or lose Britain forever. The battle was carnage. The Britons, disorganized and undisciplined in a Roman sense, were hemmed in by their own war wagons and the terrain. The Roman tactics, disciplined ranks, pila volleys, and close combat cohesion proved superior. Though they were vastly outnumbered, they carved through the Britons with terrifying efficiency. The Britons broke, then were slaughtered as they tried to flee. Thousands perished. The rebellion ended not in fire, but in blood. Boudica, humiliated and defeated, is said to have taken poison to avoid capture, though her exact fate remains unknown. Rome reasserted control swiftly and cruelly, disarming tribes, stationing permanent garrisons, and executing suspected sympathizers. But the rebellion left scars. Rome never again underestimated native resistance. And though it claimed victory, the psychological blow remained. For a brief, terrifying moment, Britannia had slipped from their grasp. Not because of a foreign army, but because of a wronged woman with nothing left to lose. And so the name Boudica echoes, not as a mere footnote in Roman history, but as a defiant cry that empires, no matter how vast, can bleed. Her rebellion was crushed, but her legend endured. And in every spark of local resistance, every whisper of revolt, Rome would remember her, the queen who set their world ablaze and dared them to put it back together. The mists of northern Britannia cling to the memory of a legion long vanished, the Ninth Hispana, formed in the days of the Roman Republic and blooded in the brutal conquests of Hispania. This seasoned force marched across the known world for the glory of Rome. Yet somewhere, sometime after the turn of the 2nd century, it disappeared from the written record, as if swallowed whole by the wilds of Caledonia. No grand tomb, no farewell inscription, just silence, ghost story inked in imperial parchment and speculation. In its prime, the Ninth was a feared engine of conquest. They quelled the rebellion of Boudica, leaving behind scorched ruins and a legacy of terror. Stationed for years at Iberacum, now York, they were the main Roman military presence in the north of Britannia, tasked with controlling hostile tribes and keeping the frontier secure. But the frontier was never truly secure, not in the wind-swept moors, not in a thick forest where the druids still whispered old prayers to gods older than Rome. By the early 2nd century, the Ninth was under increasing pressure. There are signs of growing unrest among the northern tribes, the Caledonians, the Votadine, the Selgovi. Archaeological finds suggest a sharp uptick in Roman fortifications. Something was coming, or had already begun. Then, inexplicably, the Ninth disappears. The Fasti, the official Roman military records, no longer mention them. When a new legion arrives, the 6th Victrix, it is not to reinforce the north, but to replace. The Ninth Standard no longer flies. Were they annihilated in a forgotten campaign beyond the wall? Some believe so, that they marched into the mists of Scotland and never returned. Others suggest a quieter fate, that they were transferred eastward, perhaps to the Rhine or the Danube, and were simply disbanded or absorbed. But if that were so, why the silence? Why the total absence of ceremony? Rome was a culture obsessed with record, reputation, and ritual. This complete vanishing of a whole legion was not a clerical error. It was an erasure. Clues are tantalizing, but frustratingly incomplete. A tile stamp found in the Netherlands suggests that elements of the Ninth may have been redeployed to the continent, yet the dating is uncertain. Other fragments, an inscription here, a name there, hint at scattered survivors. But a full unit? A full legion? No, that part of the story has vanished. What remains is a cold trail leading into the highlands, where the wind still howls through the heather and forgotten fortresses lie in ruin. Some say their bones lie buried in bogs and shallow graves, nameless among the peat. Others say they were betrayed from within. Whatever the truth, the fate of the Ninth Hispana remains one of the Roman Empire's great unsolved mysteries. Their silence echoes louder than any battle cry. And as you lay here in the stillness, picture that slow, final march, shields up, sandals wet with dew, breath rising into the morning fog, and an unknown end waiting just beyond the next ridge. A legion lost, not just in history, but in time itself.
Stretching like a scar across the waste of northern Britain, Hadrian's Wall is more than just an ancient ruin. It is a line etched in stone between worlds. For the Romans, it marked the northernmost boundary of their empire, the edge of the known and the beginning of the unknowable. But for those who built it, guarded it, stared out from its battlements day after day, it was a prison of discipline and boredom, of wind-chilled mornings and distant thoughts of home. Construction began around the year 122 CE, under the orders of Emperor Hadrian himself. His vision was not merely military, but symbolic. Where previous emperors had chased expansion, Hadrian sought to hold what Rome had, to define its limits, not extend them. The wall would stretch over 70 miles from coast to coast, from the River Tyne in the east to the Salway Firth in the west, following the contours of hills and ridges, always high, always watching. Built of stone in some sections, turf in others, the wall stood roughly 15 feet tall, with forts, mile castles, and watchtowers spaced at regular intervals like beads on a cord. Behind it, a deep ditch. In front of it, an empire bracing against the wind. The soldiers stationed here, auxiliaries drawn from all corners of Rome's reach, came not just from Italy, but from Gaul, Thrace, Syria, even North Africa. For many, the climate was a cruel shock, wet, cold, and endlessly gray. The sun was a rare visitor. The nights, longer than memory. Life on the wall was repetitive, a rhythm of watches, patrols, and endless maintenance. Stones had to be checked, moss cleared, gates secured. Supplies came up slowly by cart or ship, and the food was often as bland as the weather. Grain, salted meat, hard bread. Letters from home were rare, and the faces of comrades were the only constants. Yet amid this monotony, there was danger. Raids from the north could be swift and brutal. Fires lit in the distance meant alert, horns, shouts, rushed armor, and trembling hands. But Hadrian's Wall was never truly impenetrable. It was not a modern border, but a threshold, porous, alive. Trade flowed through designated gates, often taxed. Locals bartered goods and information. Some tribes north of the wall had uneasy alliances with the garrisons, even family ties. And Roman soldiers, far from the moral reach of Rome, often took local wives, started families, and blurred the very line they were sent to enforce. Today the wall is quiet. Grass grows over fallen stones. Sheep wander freely where sentries once stood. But listen closely and you can almost hear the ironclad footsteps. It's the grumble of Latin voices, the creak of wooden doors in the wind. The wall is memory in stone, not just a relic, but a question. What is a frontier, really? A defense? A division? Or simply a monument to fear? As you lie still, breathing slow, imagine standing atop that wall, the dusk settling in, the horizon endless, and the silence of the ancient world pressing in from all sides.
Behind the thick stone walls of a Roman fort on Hadrian's frontier life, unfolded not in the clash of swords, but in the soft thud of footsteps on dirt, the scrape of wet stones, and the murmured prayers whispered at dawn. The fort was a machine of routine, a place where time moved in measured, deliberate strokes, where every hour had its duty and every man his place. The layout was precise, almost modular, a central headquarters building, the Principia, at the heart, flanked by barracks, stables, granaries, and workshops. The commanding officer lived in relative luxury, in a villa-style home with heated floors, mosaics, and private rooms. But for the average soldier, the miles, life was communal and cramped. 8 men shared a contubinium, a tiny room off a long hallway, sleeping side by side on wooden planks with straw mattresses. Their shields and gear stored in orderly racks. Privacy was a foreign concept. A trumpet or a horn The bucina marked the day's beginning. Soldiers rose early, donned their tunics and belts, and began their duties. Drill and weapons practice came first. Endless formations, throwing javelins, marching in step across the parade ground. Afterwards, chores, cleaning the barracks, hauling water, repairing walls, sharpening blades, or helping the fort's blacksmiths and cobblers. Even the laziest hands were kept busy. Idleness, the Romans believed, invited decay of the body and of the empire. Meals were functional. Bread made from coarse flour, porridge of grains and legumes, bits of salted pork or fish when available. A soldier's diet wasn't luxurious, but it was filling. And in the evenings, the mood softened. Around the fort's small hearths, men played dice, carved tokens, awed, shared stories of faraway provinces, of desert heat, of African lions, of Germanic snows. Some sang in low voices, their languages mingling into a stew of Latin, Greek, and native tongues. Religion was never far. Small shrines dotted the fort, to Jupiter, Mars, Mithras, and sometimes to local gods absorbed into Roman practice. Offerings were made, omens read. Festivals, when permitted, brought a rare break in routine. On such days, spirits flowed more freely, and even the sternest centurion might smile. But beyond the walls, danger always lingered. Guards patrolled the perimeter. Watchtowers scanned the horizon. Raiders could come with no warning. And the mere isolation of the frontier, the sheer distance from the heart of the empire, wore on the men. Some succumbed to homesickness, others grew hard, suspicious, some took to superstition. They scratched charms into their walls, kept amulets under their pillows, left secret offerings to household gods before sleeping. Now, the ruins remain. Grass-covered outlines, stone stubs, fragments of hearths where warmth once lived. The ghosts of garrisons past seem to hover in the mist, their voices long gone, but their footprints faintly visible in the dust of time. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine their world, the clink of armor, the crackle of fire, the slow exhale of a soldier staring at the stars, wondering if Rome still remembered his name. Beneath the busy courtyards and barracks of Roman forts, in darkened chambers carved into the earth or stone, there existed another world, hidden, sacred, and known only to a chosen few. This was the realm of Mithras. Two outsiders. He was little more than a foreign deity with strange rituals. The two initiates of the cult. Mithras was a god of light, an oath of secrecy and inner transformation, and his temples, the Mithria, were gateways to a deeper truth. The cult of Mithras thrived among Roman soldiers, especially those stationed far from home, originating likely from Persian roots, but reshaped entirely within the Roman world. Baptism was a mystery religion, meaning its doctrines were not written down or spoken openly. Everything was experienced, understood, endured. Members swore solemn oaths of silence, and the rituals they practiced were known only to those who passed through the levels of initiation. A Mithraeum was unlike any other temple, low-ceilinged, narrow, windowless, deliberately cave-like. It echoed the mythic cave where Mithras In the central story, Soothe the primordial bull. That image, Mithras kneeling upon the bull, dagger in hand, stars above, was carved or painted in nearly every sanctuary. Candles flickered in niches, incense smoked from small altars, and in the cold, dark silence, the ceremony began. Initiates were tested through symbolic trials. 7 grades of ascension marked their spiritual journey, from raven to father. Each step involved ritual purifications, tests of endurance, reenactments of cosmic myths. The language was astrological, the symbolism intense. To be part of the brotherhood was to belong not just to a religion, but to a tightly knit circle that transcended rank. Within the Mithraeum, a centurion and a common foot soldier might kneel side by side, equal in the eyes of the god. Why did Mithras appeal so strongly to soldiers? Caps, it was the emphasis on loyalty, struggle, and light emerging from darkness. Caps, it was the secrecy, a refuge from the dull repetition of daily duties. Or perhaps it was the promise of eternal renewal of a soul reborn through initiation and trial. For men who face death, not just in battle, but in boredom, frost, and loneliness, that promise meant something. And then, with the rise of Christianity, the mystery cults faded. Mithraea were abandoned, sealed, or buried. But many survived, their walls still painted, their altars still intact. One such temple was discovered near Hadrian's wall at Karaburg. In its depths, offerings were found, coins, bones, altars inscribed in Latin, all left behind by long-forgotten hands. As you listen now, eyes closed, imagine walking down into that temple. The air is cold and still, the ceiling low, the walls carved. A central altar stands before you, and in the dim glow of flickering flame, the face of Mithras emerges, ancient, serene, and silent. You are among brothers. You are among secrets. Ku, you are among shadows. Long before email or even ink on paper as we know it, there were tablets, thin slivers of wood coated in wax or scratched with stylus strokes, carrying whispers of everyday life from the distant edges of empire. And at Vindolanda, just south of Hadrian's wall, a treasure trove of such voices was found, buried for centuries in the damp, preserving petric soil of northern Britain. The Vindolanda tablets remain among the most intimate and human artifacts of Roman military life ever uncovered. Here, amid the ruins of a once bustling auxiliary fort, were found not proclamations or laws, but the scribbled chatter of real people, soldiers, wives, slaves, merchants, children. Hundreds of wooden tablets, some barely larger than a playing card, inscribed in ink with everyday concerns: food, clothing, invitations, boredom, longing. These weren't grand tales of conquest. They were reminders that even on the fringe of the Roman world, life was lived in small, familiar rhythms. One letter is from a woman named Claudia Severa, the wife of a commanding officer, inviting a friend to her birthday party. The Latin is formal, yet affectionate, and in the final lines, she writes in her own hand. One of the earliest known examples of a woman's handwriting in the Western world. I shall expect you, sister, she says gently, "Be well." Across nearly 2,000 years, her voice still lingers. Soft, warm, unmistakably human. Another tablet contains a report from a soldier about missing socks. Others mention beer rations, broken equipment, or requests for leave. One man complains of the unbearable British weather. Another writes of a shipment of oysters, perhaps a taste of home sent north for a fleeting comfort. And among these fragments are glimpses of tension, too. Reports of local unrest, worries over supplies, concerns about discipline and morale. Yet what binds them all is their ordinariness and their familiarity. These people were not so different from us. They worried about the cold, missed their families, grew tired of routine. They laughed, gossiped, and celebrated. They wrote to one another in moments stolen between duty. The tablets of Vindolanda remind us that history is not just made in marble halls or battlefields, but in quiet words exchanged in cramped rooms and candlelit corners. Now, the site is a quiet archaeological park, the wind still threading through the remnants of stone walls. But somewhere below, more tablets may lie, waiting patiently in the dark earth. More voices, more stories, more reminders that even on the edge of an empire, humanity endures in every sentence scratched by hand. As you breathe slow, let your mind drift to a small wooden room lit by oil lamps. A soldier sits at a desk, hunched over a tablet. Aside, the rain taps gently on the roof. Inside, he writes to someone far away, perhaps a mother, a friend, a lover. You are reading over his shoulder now. His thoughts are simple, his voice quiet. But somehow, even after 2 millennia, you can still hear it. By the early 5th century CE, the eagle standards of Rome were no longer symbols of strength in Britannia, but shadows of a fading memory. The legions, once proud and immovable, had grown thin, overstretched, and weary. The empire itself, riven by internal decay, external pressure, mounting economic strain, could no longer afford to defend its farthest provinces. And so, like the tide retreating from the shore, Rome began to withdraw. In the year 410, Emperor Honorius is said to have sent a letter to the cities of Britain, telling them they must now look to their own defense. It was a death knell dressed in polite indifference. The last Roman troops quietly departed, not with ceremony, but with necessity. There were no final battles, no dramatic last stands along Hadrian's wall, just silence. The stones remained, the forts emptied, and the people who had lived under the shadow of the eagle for generations were left to find a new rhythm. What happened next wasn't a sudden collapse, but a long, slow unweaving. The roads cracked, the villas fell into disrepair. Trade with the continent dwindled. Latin faded from daily speech. The infrastructure that had held the province together, baths, forums, aqueducts, administration, began to erode like stone in the rain. But the memory of Rome lingered, not in marble or steel, but in habits, names, and buried foundations. Some Romanized Britons held on to their status and customs. Others intermarried with newcomers, Saxons, Jutes, Picts, over time. kingdoms emerged from the patchwork, often ruled by warlords who claimed Roman blood or bore Latin names. Christianity, once introduced during the imperial years, remained a flickering light, kept alive in small monasteries and oral tradition. A new world was being born, but its bones were Roman. Hadrian's Wall, once a symbol of power. Law and order became a quarry. Stones were hauled away to build barns, chapels, farmhouses. Forts turned into sheep pastures. The great frontier, once manned by soldiers from across the empire, was now guarded by silence and sheep. But it did not vanish. Even now, its spine still stretches across the land, visible to anyone who walks the path, a monument not just to Rome, but to endurance. And yet, despite the fading of empire, the human spirit persisted. Children played among the ruins. Farmers plowed soil where parades once marched. Stories were told of ancient warriors and distant emperors, their names misremembered, but still passed down in whispers. Rome, the empire, had fallen, but Rome, the idea, its order, its imagination, its shadows, would echo for centuries to come. As you rest now, let your breath match the rhythm of that long goodbye. A province once alive with orders, soldiers, and structure now returns to mist and earth. You stand alone in the ruins of a Roman fort, moss curling up the walls, birdsong breaking the silence. The empire is gone, but you are not. You are the witness, the dreamer, the sleeper. Let the past drift gently into silence and sleep. Long before the Roman eagle cast its shadow over the British Isles, another power held sway, not from stone walls or iron blades, but from groves, hills, and whispered rites. The Druids. To the Romans, they were a mystery. Priests, judges, seers, and perhaps even rebels. Their knowledge was ancient, their authority immense, and though Rome tried to erase them, their memory endured in whispers and ruins. The Druids left no writings of their own. Everything we know comes from others. Roman chroniclers like Tacitus and Caesar, who both feared and respected them. They described them as intermediaries between man and nature, and between life and death. They worshipped in sacred groves, honored rivers and stars, and performed rituals the Romans did not understand, or perhaps didn't want to. Some claimed the Druids practiced human sacrifice. Others said they merely guided the soul's journey from this world to the next. What is certain is that they were guardians of memory. They memorized vast oral histories, performed rituals aligned with the solstices, and served as anchors of culture among the tribal peoples of Britain, especially in the north, where Rome's reach was thinnest. When the Romans arrived, they saw not just warriors, but a spiritual system they couldn't absorb, and so they targeted it. Temples were destroyed, sacred groves burned, and druidic practices were driven underground. But beliefs don't vanish so easily. Even after centuries of Roman rule, traces of the old faith persisted in charms, in local festivals, in burial practices too subtle to stamp out. Archaeological finds tell us what texts cannot. Bog bodies, preserved in dark stillness, suggest ritual deaths. Keel forts with unusual arrangements hint at ceremonial purposes. In certain graves, marked not with Roman order, but tribal care, showed that old loyalties died hard. Even near Hadrian's Wall, that line of civilization, echoes of older rites remained. Offerings buried by streams, bones arranged with reverence, stones aligned with the stars. In time, Christianity would replace both Roman and Druidic beliefs. But even in medieval churchyards, pagan symbols endured, carved quietly into headstones, tucked into the margins of manuscripts. The Druids, though silenced, had shaped the spirit of the land. Now, as night deepens, imagine standing at the edge of a windswept grove. The trees around you are tall, still, and ancient. The stars blink overhead. A low chant hums in the air, language lost, meaning forgotten, but rhythm eternal. You are in the presence of something older than empire, something that listens in silence, beneath the floors of Roman bathhouses, beside temple altars, and even thrown into sacred springs. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of thin, rolled-up lead sheets, cold to the touch, darkened with age, and inscribed with something deeply personal. Curses, known as defixions, or curse tablets. These eerie messages were not the wild spells of fantasy, but desperate appeals to gods, spirits, or underworld forces. They reflect a side of Roman life rarely seen in marble monuments or proud inscriptions, a world of jealousy, betrayal, longing, and quiet revenge. In Roman Britain, dozens of these tablets have been found, especially at sites like Bath. The process was simple, yet precise. Supplicant would inscribe a name, often of someone who had wronged them, along with a plea for divine punishment. Let him lose his mind. One reads, may his sleep be disturbed. May his limbs grow weak. Another, more practical, simply says, I curse the man who stole my cloak. Some are elegantly written in Latin. Others are clumsy, as though scratched by those barely literate. Their emotion is raw, burning through time. Often they were addressed not to Jupiter or Mars, but to more ancient chthonic beings, gods of the underworld, spirits of the dead. Some included drawings, stick figures bound in chains, pierced with nails, buried with dolls or hair, small, symbolic gestures of imagined vengeance. The tablets were typically folded or rolled, sometimes pierced with nails, and deposited in places thought to connect the human and divine. Springs, wells, graves, temple cellars. The most famous site in Britain for such finds is the sacred spring at Bath, dedicated to the goddess Sulis Minerva. There, more than 100 cursed tablets were retrieved, each one a tiny scream into the void. But what do these curses really tell us? They show that life under Roman rule, even in a province like Britannia, was filled with daily tensions: theft, adultery, lost bets, broken hearts. Sad, when the official channels failed or didn't exist, people turned to the divine, to the irrational, to the quiet rituals of desperation. There is something hauntingly relatable in these small, lead scrolls. They are ancient, yes, but also profoundly human. Someone, centuries ago, sat in silence, carved their pain into metal, and trusted the universe to respond. Whether justice came or not, the act itself brought a strange kind of comfort. Now, as you breathe slowly, imagine holding one of these tiny tablets in your hand. Its surface is cold, the letters sharp, yet trembling. You do not know the name inscribed, but you feel the emotion behind it, like a whisper from long ago, suspended in metal and time. And as you let it go, gently placing it back into the earth, the wind carries the last of its grievance into the night. The Roman world was rich with gods, a pantheon of deities large enough to fill temples, stories, festivals, and prayers. But in distant provinces like Britannia, the divine landscape became something stranger, older, wilder, and far more personal. Here, amid the damp hills and wind-swept coasts, the old gods never fully disappeared. Instead, they adapted, or rather, they were never asked to leave. Archaeologists working along Hadrian's wall and across the frontier have uncovered hundreds of inscriptions dedicated not to Jupiter or Mars, but two lesser-known deities: local spirits, river gods, mountain guardians. Their names are sometimes barely legible, scrawled on worn altars. Others remain fully intact, chiseled in Latin by soldiers and settlers who knew that to survive in this strange land, it was best to honor both Rome and the land itself. You'll find dedications to Cosidius, a northern war god depicted as a Roman soldier, but whose name was likely Celtic in origin, or to Belisarius, another warlike spirit whose shrines stood beside marching routes. Some gods were entirely unique, one-off names, perhaps household spirits or personal protectors invoked in private. Others were syncretic, combinations of Roman and native traits. Sphulis Minerva, for example, fused the Roman goddess of wisdom with the native healing goddess of the sacred spring at Bath. These weren't gods of abstract theology, okay? They were gods of place, of water, of tree and stone, of crossroads, fog, and fire. In a world where travel was slow, sickness common, and danger constant, the divine was everywhere, and it was wise to pay attention. Many of the inscriptions found are deeply ordinary. The God who heard my prayer, to the goddess who healed my son. Simple gratitude carved in stone. Offerings of coins, pottery, or food might be left beside the altar. Sometimes small figurines, crude, charming, sincere, were buried in soil or laid beside hearths. These weren't grand religious acts. They were small, hopeful gestures in a vast and uncertain world. When Christianity came, most of these gods vanished from formal memory. Their temples crumbled, their names faded. Yet, in the corners of old churches, among the winding village names and odd seasonal customs, you can still glimpse their shadows. The gods of Roman Britain never truly left. They were absorbed, hidden, echoed. Now, as you drift deeper into stillness, imagine walking through the ruins of an old Roman temple, half buried in moss. The altar still stands, though no one prays at it now. The name chiseled on its face is worn, half lost to time. But as the breeze moves through the stones and the trees sway above, you feel it, the sense that something once sacred passed through here, and maybe still lingers. To the Romans, death was not an ending, but a transformation, a passage into another realm that existed parallel to the living. The dead were ever present, honored and feared, remembered through rituals and invoked in dreams. And in a place like Roman Britain, where isolation, violence, and distance from home were constant realities, the boundary between life and death often felt thinner. Roman burial sites, the landscape of Britannia, ranging from elaborate stone sarcophagi to humble cremation pits. Soldiers were often buried outside the walls of forts, near the roads they had once patrolled. Caves, inscriptions etched into gravestones, revealed their ages, origins, and ranks, often shockingly young. Some dead in their teens, far from the warm Mediterranean coasts of their birth. One reads, "To the spirits of the departed, here lies Flavius, standard-bearer, who lived 25 years, 7 months, and 3 days." The precision, the need to mark time, reflects how death was both personal and official, a final posting, logged for eternity. The Romans believed that without proper rites, the soul of the dead might become restless, a lemur, a ghost wandering the world, unseen but felt. That is why offerings were made: food, wine, coins for Quran, the mythical ferrymen. Even in Britannia, so far from Rome's sacred hills, the rituals were carried out with care. Yet, in this distant land, new and older beliefs merged. Some graves contain Roman symbols, laurel wreaths, eagles, Latin inscriptions. Others show native traditions, crouched burials, grave goods like pottery, knives, or beads. Occasionally, both appear together, a reminder that in death, as in life, identity was fluid. Frontier people were both Roman and Briton, citizen and outsider, soldier and spirit. Hauntingly, some burial sites seem rushed, disturbed, or incomplete, victims of raids, disease, or forgotten wars. In one tomb, the skeleton of a woman was found facing downward, limbs tied. A curse tablet had been placed beside her. Was she feared or wronged? The grave does not answer. Ghost stories were common in Roman Britain. Pliny the Younger wrote of spectral figures wandering courtyards, dragging chains. Others spoke of spirits appearing in dreams, asking for their bodies to be moved or their names to be remembered. On the frontier, where fear and loneliness pressed in from all sides, these stories took root deeply. A chill whined down a corridor, the echo of footsteps at night, the sense of being watched in an empty barracks. As you settle now into the quiet of the present, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a Roman cemetery. The grass is tall, the stones are weathered, names have faded. But the lives once lived, the voices, the hopes, the final breaths still linger, not as threats, but as reminders that even in forgotten corners of empire, people lived, died, and were mourned. Close your eyes, breathe deeply. The past does not haunt. It hums, soft and low, beneath the surface of time. In the far reaches of of Roman Britain, where roads thinned and towns gave way to misty hills. Medicine and magic walked hand in hand. Healing was not just the realm of physicians with tools and scrolls, but of sacred places, whispered prayers, and age-old rituals performed beside bubbling waters or beneath moonlit stones. One of the most revered sources of healing was water, not just for its practical use, but for its divine essence. Springs and wells were believed to possess sacred properties, especially those that flowed clear and constant. To the Romans, these places were often associated with goddesses like Minerva or Sulis, protectors of health, wisdom, and renewal. But to the local Britons, such waters were already ancient, long revered as gateways between worlds. The spa town of Bath, known in Roman times as Aquae Sulis, became a famous sanctuary. Pilgrims came not just to bathe in the warm, mineral-rich waters, but to offer prayers, tokens, small gifts to the goddess. Cursed tablets were thrown into the spring alongside offerings of jewelry, coins, and crafted figurines. Some left messages seeking healing. Others simply expressed thanks. The waters, they believed, did not just soothe the body. They listened. Healing was not only found in temples, in villages and forts. Medicine was a mix of Roman knowledge and folk tradition. Doctors used herbs like chamomile, poppy, and willow bark. But alongside ointments and poultices, there were spells. Amulets were worn to protect against fever. Stones with naturally occurring holes, known as hagstones, were hung over beds to ward off nightmares. Even soldiers carried charms carved with protective words or symbols. Medical texts of the time reveal an understanding of anatomy, surgery, and diet. Yet among those pages are also instructions for chanting incantations, burning herbs during certain moon phases, or placing the patient's name inside a wax doll to draw illness away. To the people of the frontier, there was no contradiction. Health required both science and spirit. Some healing sanctuaries were small, just a hut beside a spring, a circle of standing stones, or a grove known only to locals. Others were more formal, with baths, altars, and priests. Yet all shared one thing in common, the belief that the land itself could offer comfort. Now, in the hush of your resting breath, picture yourself sitting beside a quiet spring deep in the woods. The water trickles endlessly. The air smells faintly of moss and iron. You close your eyes and you feel the centuries press gently around you, not heavy, but tender. You are not sick. You are not lost. You are simply being restored. Let the sound of ancient waters carry you further into stillness, beneath the marching boots of Roman soldiers, under layers of stone and soil. Archaeologists have uncovered something strange. Small, dark temples carved into the earth, hidden away from sunlight and public view. These were Mithraean shrines to the mysterious god Mithras, and their presence on the edges of the empire, including here in Britain, hints at a secret world within the legions. Mithras was a god of Persian origin, but by the 2nd century, he had become the centerpiece of a private cult favored by Roman soldiers. His followers met in underground chambers that mimicked caves, meant to represent the cosmos. At the far end of each temple was a depiction of Mithras slaying a cosmic bull, a symbol rich with meaning. Though never fully explained, the rites of Mithras were closed to outsiders. Only men were admitted. Initiation was secretive and demanding, involving 7 levels of ascent, each tied to a planet and a trial. Fire, water, darkness. These were not just metaphors, but literal stages of the soul's transformation. It was not a religion of the state, but of the individual, intimate, mystical, and bound in loyalty. In Britain, Mithria have been discovered at places like London, Carroburg, near Hadrian's Wall, and even inside Roman forts. Their walls were adorned with astrological symbols and scenes of celestial battle. Altars bore oil, lamp, soot. Bones of sacrificed animals were found in their pits. These weren't casual meeting rooms, okay? They were designed for deep ritual, experienced by torchlight, surrounded by chanting brothers, within spaces that echoed with otherworldly power. For soldiers posted far from home, Mithraism offered something more than worship. It was a bond, a brotherhood beyond rank, ethnicity, or birthplace. In the cold, hard life of the frontier, it gave purpose, identity, and the promise of spiritual ascent. The cult may have promised protection in battle, but it also offered the comfort of cosmic order, a sense that the chaos of the world was just part of a greater mystery, and then it vanished. By the 4th century, as Christianity rose and the old gods were outlawed, Mithraism disappeared, shrines were buried, statues were broken, and yet, underground, their silence remains. The rooms still stand, the altars still wait, as if the rituals might resume at any moment. Now, as you breathe slowly and deeply, imagine descending stone steps into a chamber lit only by flame. The air is cool. The walls are carved with stars. You kneel beside others in silence, eyes fixed on the painted god who holds a dagger and a bull. You do not speak. You do not need to. You are part of something older than memory, and in this stillness, you feel its weight. You're in the heart of the mystery. When we picture the Roman world, we often imagine grand libraries, marble inscriptions, and philosophers dictating epics. But in the muddy borderlands of Roman Britain, writing took on a humbler yet no less powerful form. Here, among the rain-soaked forts and scattered settlements, words were scratched on wax tablets, etched into pots, carved into walls, and even written on scraps of wood buried in mud for centuries. The most remarkable discovery came at Vindolanda, a Roman fort just south of Hadrian's Wall. There, preserved in the oxygen-deprived layers of wet earth, archaeologists uncovered over 1,000 wooden writing tablets, some no bigger than a modern postcard. These fragile slivers of thin wood still bear ink handwriting, revealing letters, lists, invitations, and everyday notes from nearly 2,000 years ago. One tablet is a birthday invitation. A woman named Claudia Severa inviting her friend Sulpicia Lepidina to a party. The Latin is graceful, the tone intimate. It is the earliest known writing in Latin by a woman in Britain, and it feels startlingly modern, Another tablet contains a shopping list. Another records a soldier's request for leave. One particularly weary note simply reads, "I have sent you socks, 2 pairs of sandals, and underpants." It's a mundane, itemized list, yes, but it's also a glimpse into the human details of life at the edge of empire. These messages weren't grand proclamations. They were the quiet paperwork of life. Rosters, requests, bills, gossip. And yet, in their ordinariness, they become extraordinary. They show that literacy, while uneven, was present even here, among soldiers, merchants, and wives, in a land far from Rome's educated elite. But writing wasn't confined to tablets. Graffiti scratched into walls reveals jokes, names, even insults. Pottery shards, known as astraca, were used as makeshift notebooks. Names were carved into combs, brooches, even swords. One child's writing practice, etched onto a piece of slate, shows a beginner's hand tracing out the alphabet, just as students do today. And in some temples and graves, words take on sacred form, short inscriptions to gods, dedications to the dead, prayers preserved in stone. These were not simply records, okay? They were acts of memory, of meaning-making, of reaching across time, okay? Now, as your thoughts drift into deeper stillness, imagine holding one of those tablets in your hand. The ink is faded, the wood soft from age, but the words are still there, faint but legible. A soldier's longing, a woman's friendship, a child's first letters, all still waiting to be read. And in that quiet connection, you realize time speaks softly, but it never stops speaking. For centuries after the fall of Roman rule, the traces of Roman Britain lay buried beneath fields, forests, and forgotten roads. The villas crumbled, the forts collapsed into hills. The inscriptions faded under moss and stone, and yet the land remembered, as always does. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as interest in Britain's deep past began to grow, archaeologists and curious amateurs alike turned their eyes to the soil with spades, brushes, and eventually more sophisticated tools. They began to uncover what time had hidden. Roman coins scattered like breadcrumbs. Pottery shards worn smooth by centuries. Pieces of armor, altars, mosaics, okay, and slowly the picture began to return. Sites like Vindolanda, Bath, and Hadrian's Wall revealed a world once bustling with life. Legions marching, merchants trading, families living day by day, unaware that they were building the future's forgotten past. And as the earth gave up its secrets, our understanding of Roman Britain changed from vague myth to vivid detail. Each artifact is a whisper, a brooch once pinned to a cloak, okay, stylus dropped in the mud beside a barracks, a child's toy carved from bone. These are not grand monuments, but the everyday echoes of lives lived with hope, duty, joy, and fear, just like ours. Even now, discoveries continue. A farmer's plow strikes a buried floor. A new building project unearths a Roman road. Modern techniques like ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR imaging reveal the outlines of entire towns long erased by time. The past, it turns out, is not gone. It's just waiting, patient, quiet, and layered deep. Yet, what's most moving is not the objects themselves, but what they represent: memory, continuity, the fragile but enduring thread of human life across centuries. When we hold a Roman shoe or a worn coin, we're not just touching history, we're touching someone's story. And now, as your mind settles into stillness, picture yourself in the middle of an excavation. The sun is low. Dust hangs in the air. Brush strokes away soil to reveal the curved edge of something old, something once held by a hand like yours. You feel time open around you, vast and gentle. You are not alone in the present. You are resting beside the quiet breath of the past. Sleep comes easily now, carried on the echoes of lives long buried, but never truly lost. Beyond the forts, the muddy roads, and the cold winds of Hadrian's wall, Roman Britain had another face, one of wealth, comfort, and cultivated beauty. Here, in the rolling hills of the countryside, members of the elite built spacious villas, elegant rural estates that combine Roman architecture with the soft rhythms of British land. Life here moved, not with the pace of marching feet, but with the turning of seasons and the hum of privilege. A Roman villa in Britain was more than a farmhouse. It was a symbol of status, of civilization, of Roman identity far from Rome itself. Built from stone, with tiled roofs and symmetrical layouts, these country homes featured colonnaded courtyards, ornamental gardens, private bathhouses, and dining rooms decorated with intricate mosaics. Imagine walking across a floor of tiny colored tiles arranged into swirling patterns. Vines, dolphins, gods, every step a work of art. Light filters in through high windows. In one corner, a fire crackles beside reclining couches. Bronze oil lamps cast a soft, golden glow. A servant pours wine diluted with honey. Somewhere nearby, a fountain splashes into a marble basin. Owners of these villas were often Romano-British aristocrats, wealthy locals who had adopted Roman customs, language, and fashion. They wore tunics dyed in imported colors, wrote letters on wax tablets, and decorated their homes with objects from across the empire. Glass from Gaul, pottery from Africa, spices from the East. Life on the villa revolved around agriculture. Large estates produced grain, wool, cattle, and even wine. Slaves and hired workers tended the fields, pressed olives, and kept the bathhouses warm. The elite owner might spend the day managing affairs, reading scrolls, or discussing politics with guests, or simply strolling through his garden while the empire turned far beyond the hedgerows. But luxury did not mean isolation. Villas were part of wider networks, economic, cultural, and social. Goods flowed in and out. Messages traveled by courier. Guests arrived from distant towns, bringing news and laughter. And though the frontier walls stood far to the north, their presence shaped even this genteel world. It was always the edge of something larger. As you drift deeper into rest, picture yourself reclining in a sun-drenched atrium. You hear birds in the garden, the rustle of wind through vines, the soft footsteps of servants across mosaic floors. You are far from war, far from hardship. Here, time is slow, and life is smooth as polished stone. Let the peace of this countryside estate cradle you into dream. In the villas of Roman Britain, comfort was not just a luxury, it was a philosophy. To live well was to live as Rome taught, with structure, beauty, and a devotion to the pleasures that elevated life above the ordinary. Even here, at the edge of the empire, these ideals shaped daily rituals, especially those of the bath, the table, and the body. The Roman bath was more than a place to clean oneself. It was a social sanctuary, a daily pause in the rhythm of life. Many country villas had their own private bathhouses, small but complete versions of the grand public thermae found in cities. Heated by underfloor systems called hypocausts, these rooms offered a progression: warm, hot, and cold, each designed to relax the body and quiet the mind. Inside, steam clung to the walls. Mosaics shimmered beneath thin pools of water. Ketas reclined on stone benches, massaged with oils, then scraped clean with curved metal strigils. The scent of lavender or rosemary might hang in the air, drifting from a nearby brazier. For the wealthy, this was a moment of physical renewal, a daily luxury, even as winter gripped the countryside beyond. And after the bath came the meal. Roman cuisine in Britain was a fusion of imported flavors and local staples. Bread, cheese, and roasted meats were common, but so too were delicacies brought from far-off provinces. Fish sauces like garum olives from Hispana, figs and dates from the east, and wine, always wine, flowing freely in clay amphorae stamped with foreign symbols. The table was a place of performance. Meals were served in courses, with reclining guests using fingers or spoons to savor each bite. Slaves moved silently between courses, offering trays of honey cakes, bowls of nuts, or cups of mulled wine spiced with cinnamon and pepper. Conversation floated gently over candlelight. The goal was not to fill the stomach, but to nourish the senses. And comfort extended beyond food and baths. Clothing was soft and finely woven. Floors were heated. Walls bore painted scenes of myth and nature. Even in chilly Britain, warmth could be summoned from architecture, design, and attention to detail. The home was a shield, not only from weather and time, but from the chaos of the outside world. As you let your body settle into rest, imagine yourself stepping from a warm bath, your skin clean and fragrant. You are wrapped in soft linen. A tray of fresh bread and fruit awaits beside a gently crackling fire. There is no rush, no noise, just the slow rhythm of a life well lived. The quiet luxuries of Roman Britain ease you into deeper stillness. Beneath every soft bed, every warm bath, every well-prepared meal in a Roman villa, there were hands, calloused, silent, and largely forgotten. Slaves and servants were the invisible foundation upon which the lives of the elite were built. And though history remembers the mosaics in marble, the luxury and leisure, it often forgets the human toll behind it. In Roman Britain, slavery was not based on race, but on status. A slave could be born into bondage, taken as a prisoner of war, or sold into servitude due to debt or misfortune. Some were brought from far corners of the empire: Gauls, Germans, Africans, Syrians, while others were native Britons, taken after rebellion or raid. They served in homes, fields, kitchens, bathhouses, and stables, their names often lost to time. On country estates, slaves worked from before dawn to well after dusk. In the kitchens, they ground grain by hand, prepared intricate meals, and scrubbed pots clean with sand and vinegar. In the fields, they herded sheep, tended vines, or dug trenches in the bitter cold. Inside the villa, some served as body servants, tutors, scribes, or musicians, closer to the family, but never truly part of it. Discipline could be harsh. Whipping was common. Branding or iron collars marked runaways. And yet, not all lives were equal among the enslaved. Some earned trust, even wages. Some were freed in time and became freedmen, able to own property or run businesses, though always marked by their past. K. The lives of household servants were slightly different. K. They might be poor, freeborn workers rather than slaves, hired for cleaning, nursing, or assisting with estate management. But their lives, too, were shaped by silence, obedience, and proximity to privilege. And yet, despite their absence from the records, these people touched every aspect of Roman daily life. They lit the lamps, they warmed the baths, they carried the firewood, made the beds, pressed the grapes, and swept the mosaics. Their presence is felt not in statues or inscriptions, but in the quiet regularity of comfort itself. Now, as your breath deepens, picture the stillness of an empty villa at night. Oil lamps flicker low. The family sleeps peacefully. Somewhere in a corner, a servant gathers up used towels. Another stokes the fading embers of the hypocaust fire. They move without sound, as they always have, seen but rarely remembered, and yet they are part of the story, too. Let their quiet footsteps join the hush of the night around you. In Roman Britain, the divine was never far away. Whether in the vast countryside or the stone walls of a villa, religion was woven into the rhythms of daily life, not as grand sermons or abstract theology, but as a quiet practice of presence, of offerings, of faith made tangible through space. At the heart of many villas stood small shrines, known as Laurea, where the household gods, or lares, were honored. These deities protected the home and family, standing watch over meals, births, journeys, and daily affairs. Their small statues, often tucked into niches in the wall or set above the hearth, were simple but cherished. A few drops of wine, a pinch of grain, a murmured prayer. These small acts bound the mortal to the divine in gentle, familiar ways. Larger villas might even include dedicated altars or miniature temples in their gardens. Here, incense was burned and sacrifices made on feast days. The rituals were private, domestic, yet part of the broader Roman religious fabric that stretched across the empire. Outside the home, sacred spaces dotted the landscape. Temples to Jupiter, Minerva, or Mars were built in provincial towns. blending Roman architectural style with local stone. But alongside these, we find evidence of older native British beliefs. Springs were still revered. Trees were still sacred. In many places, Roman deities were fused with Celtic gods, a kind of spiritual compromise that shaped local worship. At places like Bath, the goddess Sulis Minerva emerged, a Roman Celtic fusion of wisdom and healing. Pilgrims came to her sacred waters, leaving coins, curses, and pleas written on thin lead tablets. These votives speak in whispers. May he who stole my cloak be cursed until it is returned. Let justice be done, even in silence. Religion, then, was not confined to temples. It was in the turning of the seasons, the lighting of the lamp, the birth of a child, or the planting of grain. It was not distant. It was present, embodied, and woven into the fabric of home. As your eyelids grow heavier, imagine standing before a quiet shrine. The flame of a single oil lamp dances in the still air. A bronze figure gazes out with eternal calm. You place a sprig of rosemary at its feet and bow your head, not in fear, but in connection to the earth, to your ancestors, to the silence beyond silence. Let that sacred hush carry you deeper into rest. The villas of Roman Britain, once vibrant with laughter, footsteps, and song, did not fall in a single night. There was no dramatic fire, no invading horde at the gate. Only time, slow and relentless, pulling at the threads until the fabric of life began to fray. One by one, the lamps were extinguished, the mosaics cracked, and the gardens grew wild. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the signs were clear. Roofs leaked, walls crumbled. The great bathhouses grew cold. The hippocausts lay dormant as wood ran short or labor vanished. Trade networks faltered. Coins stopped arriving. The mosaic floors, once gleaming with color, began to gather dust. Why did the villas fall? The reasons are many, and none of them simple. The Roman Empire itself was shifting, strained by internal division, external threats, and economic instability. Britain, once a proud frontier province, became isolated. The legions were recalled to defend Italy. The administrators left. The roads went untended, and law began to dissolve into local custom. Without Rome, the structure that had supported these grand estates could not endure. Villas depended not only on agriculture, but on trade, taxation, and Roman systems of power. As the towns emptied and currency lost its value, rural estates found themselves adrift. Some were looted, others simply faded, abandoned as their owners fled or died. In a few places, the villas were repurposed. A room turned into a blacksmith's forge, a courtyard used for sheep, the elegant mosaic trampled by boots that no longer knew its story, and others, time simply took back what it had once given. Roof beams collapsed. Ivy crept through the windows. Rain washed paint from the walls. What had once been a symbol of civilization became a ruin beneath the sky. And yet, even in their decline, the villas did not vanish. Their stones were taken and reused in farmhouses or churches. Their memory lingered in local legend. And beneath fields and hedgerows, their foundations remained, waiting, as they always do, for the curious hands of the future to uncover their silence. As you sink deeper into stillness, imagine standing at the edge of an ancient villa at twilight. The walls are low and broken. The air smells of moss and earth. A single carved column leans, half swallowed by bramble. And though no voice speaks, you can feel the lives that once filled this place, their laughter, their labor, their sleep. Let the quiet of the ruin hold you gently, like ivy over stone. Though the Roman villas of Britain fell into ruin, their echoes lived on. Beneath the turf and time, they left their imprint in stone, in habit, in the very layout of the land. And long after the empire's banners had vanished from the hills, the ideas they carried lingered in quiet persistence. The structure of rural life in Britain did not collapse into chaos after Rome. Rather, it reshaped itself. Some former villa sites evolved into early medieval farmsteads or monastic holdings. The orderly fields remained. The roads, many built by Roman engineers, still connected one village to the next, and some villas became memory places where people continued to live or pray, unaware of the full history beneath their feet. Even in language, the Roman influence lingered. Latin left traces in legal terms, in place names. A Christian church, which itself had taken root in Roman households and later flourished in monastic communities that echoed Roman domestic design. Cloisters in courtyards, bathing in scriptoria, order and routine. The Roman idea of the villa as a center of power, agriculture, and refinement subtly shaped the great estates of later centuries. In the medieval manor house, one sees hints of the Roman villa, a central dwelling surrounded by farmland, overseen by a landholder with control over the labor of many. Though the context changed, the silhouette remained. Archaeologists in later centuries would uncover tile fragments, painted wall plaster, bronze brooches, and pieces of glass. They would trace the outlines of vanished walls and floor plans, marveling at how deeply Roman domestic life had embedded itself into the British countryside. Even now, in places like Chetworth or Fishburne, you can walk through reconstructed mosaics and feel a flicker of a lost world come alive. And in the imagination, too, the villas endured. Writers, poets, and historians would dream of Rome, not only of legions and emperors, but of gardens, libraries, and country life filled with order and grace. The idea of the Roman villa became a symbol of cultivated retreat, of balance between nature and design, of the pleasures of mind and body in harmony with the land. So, as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine a gentle British rain falling on a field where once stood a villa. The ground beneath holds secrets, tesserae of mosaic, a rusted key, a forgotten coin. The wind moves through the grass like a whisper, carrying stories in a language no longer spoken, but still somehow understood. Let those echoes guide you, soft and ancient, toward peaceful dreams. Long after the last Roman official left Britain, long after the baths went cold and the villas fell silent, the memory of Rome did not fade. It transformed the medieval imagination. Rome became something more than an empire. It became a dream, distant, golden, and half-remembered, like a song whose words you once knew. Monks copying manuscripts by hand would pause over Latin lines they barely understood, reverently preserving what they sensed was important. Rome, to them, was not just a past. It was a kind of perfection, a time when law ruled, when cities were grand, when the world had order, okay? And though that world was gone, its image lingered in hearts and ink. Medieval chroniclers wrote of emperors with awe, mingling fact with legend. King Arthur, in many early versions, is imagined not only as a British warlord, but as a new Caesar, crowned with the authority of lost Rome. Castles were said to be built upon Roman ruins. Heroes wielded swords forged from Roman metal. The ruins themselves were seen as the work of giants or fallen angels, too great to have come from mere men. This nostalgia wasn't just romantic, it shaped action. Charlemagne styled himself Emperor of the Romans, even in a fractured Europe. Church rituals were inherited from Roman traditions, dressed now in Christian robes. The architecture of cathedrals echoed basilicas. The law codes of medieval kings borrowed from Justinian and Caesar alike. In Britain, Roman ruins became places of mystery. A crumbling wall in a forest, a tiled floor beneath a field, okay? Pilgrims would visit these places, not for history, but for holiness. Okay, the past became sacred, not just for what it was, but for what people needed it to be. Even peasant folktales remembered Rome in shadows, a city under the hill, a golden road buried in the woods, a statue that weeps when touched at midnight. These were not true memories, but they were real in their own way. They kept Rome alive, even when no one could quite explain what Rome had been. And so, as you drift further into sleep, imagine a traveler in the Middle Ages, pausing beside a ruined archway. He does not know its name. He cannot read the weathered inscription, but he knows it means something, something greater than himself. And in the twilight, he bows his head and moves on, the echo of ancient footsteps behind him. Let those dreams, woven from memory and myth, carry you into the deep hush of night. As the centuries passed, the ruins of Roman villas slowly surrendered to the earth. Their stone walls crumbled, their mosaics faded beneath the tread of cattle and plow. Yet, from these very ruins, a new countryside began to take shape, not with the grandeur of Rome, but with the enduring quiet of daily life rooted deep in the soil. By the early medieval period, simple timber farmhouses had risen near the shells of once mighty villas. The layout was humbler, the materials rougher, but the purpose remained: to shelter, to cultivate, to survive. The idea of the Roman villa rustica lived on in these modest homes, a central dwelling surrounded by barns, fields, livestock, and laborers. But where once there were mosaics and hippocausts, now there were thatched roofs and smoky hearths. The shift was not only architectural, but cultural. Life turned inward, closer to the rhythms of the land. Seasons governed activity. Villages formed where once there had been scattered estates. Local lords replaced Roman landowners. The Latin tongue gave way to Old English and Celtic dialects. But underneath it all, a continuity remained, quiet, resilient, and deeply human. In some places, villa ruins were quarried for stone to build early churches or manor houses. In others, their floor plans became the foundation for later buildings. A farmhouse might stand on Roman walls. A field boundary might follow an ancient estate line. Time did not erase the past. It simply folded it into the present, like layers of earth pressed gently together. Even today, the English countryside bears traces of this deep past. A sudden patch of green in a wheat field may reveal a buried wall. A line of trees may follow a forgotten Roman road. The name of a village may echo a Roman landholder's name, worn smooth by centuries of use. And so, as your breath slows and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine a quiet farmhouse on a hill where a Roman villa once stood. The chimney smokes gently in the morning mist. Cave farmer walks the same path that legionaries once marched. Children play where slaves once served. And beneath the floorboards, far below the modern world, the silence of Rome sleeps on. Let that stillness fill you now, steady, timeless, and complete.